Thanks for joining me again. So far, I haven't really been talking that much about my inner masculine, but I have been talking about my journey with the outer masculine quite a bit, especially with regard to sacred union exploration, or even just the dynamics between my feminine and the outer masculine. So, what I wanted to talk about today is some more about the inner sacred union, but especially the inner masculine as a feminine. For me, my inner masculine has been feeling my inner masculine has been this really deep journey for more than 10 years now. And he's had many different expressions. When I first met him, he was going by the name Spartacus, and he was a guardian of my soul, which we do work with an aspect called the gatekeeper. So that is what this energy was a gatekeeper that was protecting basically my Akashic records, you could say, and trying to also, even at 24 years old, launch me into what I'm doing now, which I would not have been ready for truly at that age. But he was trying really hard to push me into this kind of service. So what was happening at that time was I had a lot of masculine leading in ways that actually were quite surprising to me. And then even feeling other parts of me that were more masculine. I had a part that I named Stephen, who was more this scholarly, kind of gentlemanly part of me. But I think he could also, if I remember correctly, he could also have some inner critic energies, but he was very intellectual. And at that time, I was very much trying to be intellectual in certain ways, or I mean, I still very much value my mind. I just have a different relationship to it now. So these are just two different examples of how an inner masculine can show up in the feminine, and then how that impacts your sacred union experience is also very specific, or your romantic experience in general, whether you're someone who's been actively pursuing or interested in sacred union or not. And there's a lot to be said about how your relationship with your inner masculine and also your feminine parts and aspects and how they relate with that masculine and vice versa. This really does get reflected on the outside in your romantic experience, or even just your interface with men as a woman. So for men, of course, this is the other direction. The inner feminine doesn't really, well, what happens with men is that the inner feminine doesn't really get air. And actually that happens in women as well, which is why we see so many more masculinized feminines than we do genuine feminine women in a certain sense of it. So often in men, the feminine gets kind of hidden because she can't really come out. Because the feminine is more feeling based. She's more spacious and more giving room for exploration of feeling and softness and more gentleness. The feminine can be quite fiery and direct as well, as I've personally experienced and inhabited inside of myself, yet she also has other elements at play. The masculine can tend to be more literal, less access, less self-permission to have access to the ethereal, to other dimensions, to feeling. So you can imagine the journey, or you can feel maybe for yourself the journey that it is when you're feeling inner masculine and feminine polarity. So you're feeling different parts of you at play and how they interact with each other, and how that has then played out in your life outside of you. So it really is very important to start feeling into these parts and how they show up in your world, and how their quite often polarized relationship shows up in your world. So if we look at this through 3D, 4D, and 5D consciousness, 3D is very literal. 5 sense-based reality. What you see is what you get. If it's not tangible, it's not real. So you're very much just an I. And so you might fluctuate with your masculine and feminine, or be mostly masculine. Again, whether you're a man or a woman, you might still feel like you have to be mostly masculine in this world to interact with all the patriarchal energies that are still quite dominant, especially in 3D consciousness. So 3D is very face value. Your relationships are going to be black or white, and everything is usually the blame or the accountability, you could say, is placed outside of you rather than so the problem is with men and all men, for example, rather than, oh wow, this is a reflection of what's going on inside of me. How do I feel that through? So as we go into 4D consciousness, that's what starts to happen, is that differentiation and awareness starts to grow of the polarity going on inside that's being reflected on the outside. And that can be a very challenging ground to awaken to that, especially when other people around you or your partner isn't awakening to that. You can't really have that ground together where you're both exploring that inner polarity, something still happening out here in the bond that is creating a lot of turmoil, and nothing's really getting resolved even on your side, let alone in the bond itself. So there's a lot that can come to play sometimes in as we have this 4D awakening, spiritual awakening, emotional awakening, all of it within 4D consciousness. And then the 5D consciousness coming in is more that divine self energy coming in to hold space for everything that's happening inside, to hold space for that exploration of that inner polarity and how and why it's being reflected on the outside. So this 5D energy is not emotionally neutral. It's actually quite the opposite. It's quite heart warm, heart open, compassionate, especially towards yourself, and how and why these parts have had to be the way they are, even from themselves to themselves, let alone to each other and then to the outside world. So all of this is so rich to explore, and it's a very ripe ground for so many of us to even start exploring it. This is my continued work that I'm constantly doing and examining the state of the inner union. So I welcome you into that ground to even start journaling, start self-reflecting, and seeing what that could bring up for you. And as always, thank you for tuning in, and I welcome you to connect with me or my beloveds or both, and to start exploring what we could possibly offer you in sessions or a deeper connection if you feel called to that. So I'll put all that information below. Lots of love. Bye for now.